The following program will make you want to grow things and experience new and wonderful dreams about your plants, garden, and garden design. Listener participation is strongly advised. Good evening and welcome to Down the Garden Path with your hosts Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101. To get on board, send us an email right now. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. Ladies and gentlemen, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice for your plants, gardens, and landscapes. As landscape designers and gardeners, we think it is important and possible to have great gardens that are low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen. I am Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design. I've been designing beautiful gardens and landscapes for homeowners east of Toronto for over a decade. With me is my co-host, Matthew Dressing. Welcome, Matthew. Hello there.
Hello, Joanne. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Gary. I am Matthew Dressing, horticulturist and landscape designer and owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. Natural Affinity is a landscape design and garden maintenance firm servicing Toronto and the Eastern GTA. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting, relevant, and helpful topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from each other, from our research, and from the guests that join us here on the show. As always, we welcome your questions via social media, email, and phone call.
That's right. And that's where it was. And we want to thank you for joining us on Down the Garden Path and the live version. So you get to listen to us in real time where we make real mistakes, just like that one.
And we don't know. I don't know what happened to your intro music.
I know.
I hit the button for our folks at home, and I go, yeah, come on. And I'm going, come on, you're in panic mode. And then all of a sudden, the computer screen did like a little blink. I don't know what that was, and then all of a sudden the music started, so, sorry about that, guys.
That's okay. No, I was referring to my goof. I didn't even know about that. I just figured we just were waiting for you.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank everybody for, and know that you can always check out past shows of Down the Garden Path on your favorite podcast app. The show is live here on Reality Radio every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then later in the week, it'll be made available on your favorite podcast app. So you can subscribe to Down the Garden Path and you will be notified when a new show goes live. Right, Matthew?
That is right. So tonight, it's the end of June. Can you believe it?
I know. We had 5 weeks of June, didn't we?
Wow. and it seems like there was only three. Um, but yeah, wow, yeah. So it's the end of June. So this is going to be our wrapping up the our perennial month discussion, our month-long discussion about perennials. Before we jump into that, did we want to check in with our gardens
Yeah, for
and
sure. Well, I'd love to know what's happening at the garden center. This is such a far from normal, like June's usually crazy there, but this is far from normal crazy, right?
yeah, yeah. Where we are now, we're seeing the traffic. If you've been listening to the last few weeks episodes, traffic has been strong. Things have been steady. It's been fairly steady on and off the weekends. But now, as things are starting to become a little bit more relaxed, and like the malls in our area are open, and a lot of other places are starting to pop open again, traffic is dropping greatly.
Really?
Right. It's just very quiet in the garden center now. Not to say that everyone's left us, but the traffic from what it was has dropped just unbelievably.
And you
The
know why? I
weekend
can
was
tell
so
you
slow.
why. Because
Mm,
they think you don't have anything.
yeah, that could be too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We just think the traffic, everything's opened, everyone's gone. So it was almost like when Friday the malls hit, everyone was vanished. So just it's a lot quieter. We're still getting new stock, but you're definitely right as far as the annuals, especially a lot of the tropicals and the annuals and the color, the long blooming material is gone. The bigger veggies are gone. It's very hit and miss. Remember, you posted somewhere in our area that they had I forget who it was. They had veggies still.
John's
John's.
nursery.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yes, John's Nursery and Garden Center. They had some veggies. I know there was another one near us. They got a fresh load of annuals in mixed containers, hanging baskets, some smaller ones from one of their suppliers. We've recently got more tropicals and some hanging baskets in with some good color, but it was just eaten right up in the beginning of the spring. And then we've seen so many things that weren't planted, like the veggies and the herbs, and just missing categories. So yeah, so things have slowed down. We're still distancing. We're still wearing masks. We're still sanitizing and everything. People are still getting a little close.
Yeah.
Um,
Are people, because I know you were the one garden center that was requiring people to wear masks. Are
yeah,
people
yeah.
still complying?
Yep. Everyone's still complying. Everyone's still wearing masks. And if they don't bring their own by now, they're still available face shields and masks for donations to Children's Wish. So, yeah. So everyone is definitely still thing. I was saying to Gary on the floor, everyone's getting a little lax with the social distancing. So they bring in a phone to show you, and they're like here, and they walk right up beside you or like right up to you, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, wait, let's go over here and show me the shade from afar.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, I think that it is hard though, because I think the masks, one, people feel safer. Like if you're wearing a mask and I'm wearing a mask, then you
yes,
feel like you can be closer. And also hearing, like they can't, it's hard to hear somebody, right?
they muffle you greatly.
Yeah.
Yes, most certainly. I find I often back off to like 7 or 8 feet and pull down my mask while I'm outside in the nursery areas and talk to them that way, and they can hear me better. And then I'll put my mask back up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. Because it was the first time, like usually I'm myself, like doing errands and stuff. But my husband and I went to Costco on Sunday, and we both wore masks. And I found out it was hard to have a conversation with each other,
yeah.
you know, and stuff. And I felt good. I felt like 90% of the people at Costco were wearing masks. Like I really think, I think that's one thing where our area, we're in Durham region for our listeners, we're east of Toronto. From all standards, like I feel like we're, and maybe I'm feeling overly confident or whatever, but I feel like we are not like rebelling against the masks, and everybody's in public places, feeling comfortable for the most part, like a good 90%. From everything I hear of in the city, which is why their numbers are higher, is that in Toronto they're not, not wearing masks and not, so
More
yeah, so
people.
I think it's one of those things. It works. So why are we fighting it so much?
Yep.
But the
Yeah,
show is not about the virus. The show is about perennials, right?
that's
And
right.
we're excited that we got to do this deep dive. We had 5 episodes about perennials. So if you missed it, we did, do you remember them all?
I do remember them all. Yeah, we did ground covers. We did peonies, ornamental grasses, and we did the general care and what's new for 2020.
Yes, introducing everybody to perennials, and then tonight we're talking about like a special niche, which is very popular and very in right now, right? And that's pollinators.
That's right. Yes. So pollinators and beneficial insects. That's right. So bringing all these, planting your perennials, which are attracting these beneficial insects, the bees, the pollinators, the beetles, all those creatures to your garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think people realize that if you have things like, I think of the first one that always comes to my mind is praying mantis and ladybugs, right?
Yep.
So attracting those insects, that those insects eat the bad insects.
That's right.
Right. So that's what's called, that's, my layman's term of, I'm sure you have a sciencey term, but that's my term for beneficial insects. So, I mean, aside from purchasing praying mantis and releasing their eggs in the garden, I never thought that we could attract them.
That's right. Yeah. So there's other perennial plants are going to draw in other insects and draw in those other beneficials and kind of create that, oh my gosh, I just went blank, like that pyramid, that food chain type thing, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many more different beneficial insects and pollinators. And remember too, even if they're not pollinators like bees, when we think pollinators, that's the first thing that pops to our mind, right? These pollen covered, yellow dusted little bees or mason bees and all the different ones. Jumping between flowers, and they do a great job too. But all the beneficial insects, if they're not, specifically a pollinator like a bee, they are still going to our different flowers for nectar and pollen resources for food. So they are still crawling in and out and around these other plants and flowers and are doing a little bit of cross-pollination and pollinating themselves.
Okay. So what would some of those be aside from bees?
There's a lot of different beneficial insects who are doing things. Yeah. So basically, the different beneficial insects, you mentioned praying mantises, they're not going to be doing too much of the pollinating because they're carnivores. They're going to eat your other large and small insects that are hanging around. But there are things like your parasitic wasps that are out there, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well. But your parasitic wasps, your different plant bugs, and lots of different little guys, creatures and groups of things. Hoverflies, they look like bees, but they're not quite bees. The parasitic wasps we were talking about, and there's a whole group of different one of those. Tachinid flies that are flying around, pirate bugs, things like that. They're all kind of crawling around. And some are a little bit more carnivorous or otherwise, but they'll always touch in for a little bit of nectar or pollen power where they need as well.
Okay, yeah. That's good to know.
We have a question who's popped in just as we start to jump in. Larry's just writing in. Hi, Joanne and Matt. Happy end of June. Thanks for your advice so far this season. We are very grateful. No questions, but love the show. Thanks again, Larry.
Oh, thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Larry. So there are more than just bees. There are different beneficial and predatory insects that are out and about and in the garden. Yeah.
Okay.
And these things are beetles and wasps and hoverflies and true bugs, lacewings, all sorts of different creatures.
Okay, great. I know I didn't mention, we talked about the garden center, and my garden I think is pretty much holding its own right now. So not too much to talk about. I'm just waiting for my hydrangeas to bloom, and that always makes me happy.
Yes, I've got my little Bobo waiting for her balloons to come along. Lots of things. My tomatoes are starting to show. We've got some tomatoes that are nicely forming in mine. My garlic, are your scapes starting to do the twisty curls?
Yep. They are. They definitely are. I've got them in 3. So the one spot is like more in our face in the backyard, and then the other 2 spots are within the garden. And so I keep forgetting about them. they're kind of hidden by the other plants and stuff. So I have to remember. Are you going to try and do something with your scapes?
I'm gonna try a couple. I'm gonna eat a couple. And then I'm going to leave a few on and get the little bulbils that appear in the flower. So I'm going to let them go to their little bulb seed form.
And then what do we do with those?
Yeah, and then you're just going to let them dry for a bit, and then you're going to replant those at the time you would replant your garlic cloves, and they will become basically another garlic plant.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, not having done garlic before, I believe they be in the first year they grow into a smaller bulb, but not quite as large and it's divisible as a normal clove of garlic. And then the year after that, you can basically they fatten up again. But
okay,
yeah. So I'm gonna just try propagating that and see what extras I can get. Yeah. What about beneficial and other pollinating insects in your garden? I was thinking about the show here, and then I was watching out on my balcony today, and I'm thinking, what's actually out here? And so I waited, and I was just watching the traffic go by and see some things, and you see some other bugs. But I did notice I've seen ladybugs up on my balcony before.
Okay.
I've seen some bees come up, obviously, to like the tomatoes and the other flowers. I had last week actually, and I don't know if anybody else or did you, June bugs were everywhere. About midweek, they were swarming all over my balcony. But then I did notice some little hoverflies and some parasitic wasps. Just the odd one here or there.
Yeah, see, and I don't know that I would notice what they are. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did notice. I was at a client's. We were doing a big planting last Thursday, and they had a lot of interlocking, and then that was like established, like so it's been installed for a number of years, and it had like a concrete edging, and they'd gone and kind of cleaned up that and removed all the concrete, and they were going to put down, which a little bit more standard is the edge restraint, that you nail in.
Right.
So the homeowner and I were walking around, so that had already been done, and the bits of concrete were like laying in the path that they were going to then clean up now that it had been removed. And then she noticed, like, on this is the side of her house in the sun, we noticed all these teeny tiny, and they did look like bees, but nothing like I'd never seen before, but lots of them. And they were all kind of along that edge that was now just exposed. And so she's like, oh my goodness, wonder what that is. And so I didn't know if it was like a native bee, or because a lot of the bees, I think people don't realize that actually do nest in the ground, right?
Right. There's some ground bees that have their hives underneath. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what they, like you mentioned parasitic wasps and hoverflies. Is that what you said? Yeah. So should I Google what those look like?
I was going to say, did you take a picture of the ones at that place?
That would have been smart, but no.
Considering
how many things I take a picture of, oh my goodness.
But yeah, they could have had some ground bees that were there that you've disturbed as you're doing the interlocking, and you've opened just their little easy area into the side.
Yeah. They're not. They were very plain looking, like they weren't very memorable at all. Parasitic wasps.
One of the benefits of being at home and on Zoom versus in the station.
That's right. We can.
We can Google away.
Those are big. Is that what those are? Parasitic wasps.
There are all sorts of different sizes. So
okay.
Yeah. So your parasitic wasps, they're just a very wide range of different parasitic wasps. So some of them are very, very big. Some of them you can see, and they'll fly around and attack some other insects like spiders and some caterpillars. But a lot of them can be anywhere from that size to very, very small. So they're almost, you would think they were some sort of fly or other buzzing insect if you hadn't really seen them before. As we say parasitic wasp, everyone's like, oh my God, wasps. We hate wasps, right?
Yes.
First of all, as we talk about pollinators and beneficial insects, the wasps, the big guys that we hate, that attack our Coke and our other alcoholic beverages on the patio.
And food and everything.
Right. They're drawn into the sugars that they can smell and detect in the air. But ultimately, they are good guys. They are on our side. They have a short temper maybe as we swat at them, and they might come after you. But the normal wasps, those little yellow jackety kind of creature looking things, they will go after a lot of different insects and soft bodied insects in your yard. I was at the garden center once and I saw one just, I was looking at the roses, just kind of doing some work. And one was coming directly at me. And I was like, what is going on? But it was so quick. He came right at me. He was about 4 inches away, spun right around me like an orbit, and landed on the rose in front of me. And no sooner could I follow him down did I notice he grabbed a small green caterpillar and ripped off his head and was eating it. Yeah, so he alerted me to the fact that the roses I had at the garden center had a bunch of different caterpillars that were attacking. So I took a closer look, and we had to initiate some controls there. But yeah, so they're actually after other creatures.
Oh,
they are
so
actually,
they wouldn't be that they wouldn't sting us necessarily.
not necessarily, right? We get panicked because they're smelling the sugars. They get really close to us when we're calm, and we know that they can sting and attack us. But yeah, they are out there hunting a lot of different creatures, and they are definitely on our side, maintaining our balance of good versus evil. So I bring up that story just because that's when we say wasp, that's who shows up in our mind, right?
Right, for sure.
But the parasitic wasps will not sting. So their stingers, they are actually the females. They have their stinger has been turned into an ovipositor type device. So basically, what that is an organ used to lay eggs. So a lot of the times, they basically will lay eggs on or in the bodies of their predatory insects. So like on a caterpillar, or they'll inject it into a larger beetle, and then those eggs hatch out to those beetles or other insects that are eating our plants, and those larvae eat the insects from the inside out or hatch on top of and swarm that other creature. So parasitic wasps, you hear the word wasps, everyone kind of gets a little scared. But yeah, they will not sting you. They will not hurt you.
So is there something to that we should be planting or doing in order to attract them? Because they will then help us with other things, right?
Right, right. So one of the things in kind of we have a little tip section for parasitic or attracting some beneficials and pollinators. One of the things is you can use like a lady, I call it ladybug food. So we've talked to John from Natural Insect Control, pardon me. And they have a ladybug food. And in this ladybug food, it has some different pheromones that will attract things like your lacewings and parasitic wasps and things like that. There's also a product, an artificial means of drawing them in before we talk about the plants, an oil of wintergreen. And this oil of wintergreen, the scent of this oil of wintergreen attracts a wide range of different parasitic wasps and beetles and other beneficial insects and pollinator things that'll come into your garden and kind of forage around and do their work. So it kind of gives them the signal.
Okay, so how would we apply that? So that sounds like a essential oil, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So the oil of wintergreen is easy, just some some pantry, cotton balls or cotton swab type things, soak them in it, and you can basically dot them around the area. If you have aphids that show up on something, or are going to attack your tomato or your veggie garden, for example, you can basically put them around, draw them into when your insects appear for that time, because everything is cyclical, has different times where they appear, much like the perennials, right? They're on and off at different times. Put those out and it'll draw those in. Yeah. The ladybug food, so it's like a powdery paste, and you basically mix it with a little bit of water, and you can change the consistency. It can be very liquidy. I like to add just a little bit of liquid to the powder, so it more like it makes a paste. And what I've done, I've used it out on my balcony. I saw I had aphids on my I think it was tomatoes that year and some petunias. And so what I did was I put a little bit in the leaf crotch, so where the stem meets the leaf and the petiole of the leaf sticks out. It's a great little spot. So I just put them in a few, discrete spots so that the scent could be there. But I'm not going out and looking at all this paste on my plants. But it's enough to release those pheromones and that scent to draw them in. And I found within about a week, I had attracted a few ladybugs. I didn't see lots, but a few were there. But my aphids dropped like almost to nil. So there were signs that they were there, but I really had to look to see if there was another one there.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Is there any danger of attracting something you don't want by using those pheromones?
No. There's nothing that's going to draw them in that. Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing is, if you're drawing in something, another one of our tips for attracting beneficials is don't go too crazy with removing all the other insects that are there. Right. So if you do see a few aphids, there are other insects that are passing around your garden and your spaces that are going to have to see those insects to get there. Right there, a ladybug won't come in and settle into your yard. I'm just using the ladybug as the most common probably example, or one of the more popular ones. Right, she won't lay eggs or start to settle into your garden if there's no food there. So if she finds no soft-bodied insects or aphids, they'll be passing through, they'll munch, they'll do some things, but they tend to move on. So leaving a few of those insects, or if they did draw in something there, it'll hopefully draw in the other insects that will attract it. So if you did draw something in bad, the presence of the baddie will probably draw in the presence of the good guy that you want, and they'll balance each other out. So, but no, these are designed to generally bring in a wider range of beneficial insects. And 90% of all insects tend to eat other insects. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. For sure.
So yeah, so there's definitely ways to bring things in. Now to go all the way back to what we were talking about before, your parasitic wasps. So bringing in plants that'll bring in a different, parasitic wasps, all the different types of them. Some of the things like your yarrows.
Okay.
Yarrows will bring things in. Some different cosmos, some lobelias, things like your linarias, different mints will bring them in. Potentillas, I love potentillas. Sedums, marigolds, tansies, a lot of different things that tend to have a little bit more of a flatter open flower as well, because a number of the beneficials can be, again, varying in size. So you don't want a big poofy like dahlia-like flower where they really have to forage in and work for it. The flatter things like on your tansies or open flowers like a puffy small cosmos allow the nectar and the pollen resources to be openly available and easy to be reached to.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's easier to attract them with annuals versus perennials, or do you think it matter?
I think a way that it is easier with annuals is just in the way that they bloom for so long. So you're always going to have or bloom for so long, unquote unquote. They're regularly blooming and repeat blooming. So you've always got a pollen and a nectar source there, but not all of them are made equally. And then the perennials, again, just planting your perennials. Another one of the tips to bringing in your beneficial insects is you want to have a range of the bloom times for your perennials as well.
Okay.
So that's where that kind of comparison to the annual goes. You want things to bloom in sequence and have all the different seasons. And we're going to do that as we're designing our perennial beds anyways.
Right.
So we have a source, because different insects will be at different stages of their life cycles the whole way through. So you need to attract those beneficials while that's there and have something during that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Things sound much better now that I actually plugged my headphones into the computer. Like, Gary, was there not a difference? Like,
no, well, the headphones are for you listening, right? So, but your microphone was okay.
Was my microphone okay? Because
yeah,
that was just me speaking at my computer. It wasn't me speaking into the headphones.
Matt, you can hear her okay, right?
I do. She does sound closer for sure.
Okay, so yeah, but I didn't notice because I set your volumes and gain different than what you guys have it, so it was fine here.
Yes, and when you looked at me on the screen, you would see that I had the headset on. I just didn't plug the headset into the computer, so you had no way of knowing that. So sorry, listeners. Hopefully you can hear me now. I've been told I'm pretty loud, so I'm sure they could hear me regardless. But anyway, okay. So that's good. That's good. Some good information. Do we have any listener questions?
I was going to say, as we kind of break the thing while you reconnect, we do have some listener questions. And maybe for those who are just kind of tuning in to the live show, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. It's the end of June, so we're finishing and wrapping up our our month-long discussion about perennials, with a discussion about perennials which attract pollinators and beneficial insects. So if you wanted to join the conversation, perhaps you'd like to ask a question, share an experience. Joanne and I always love to hear from you and where you're from. You can write us here at instudio101@gmail.com. Again, that's instudio101@gmail.com. And speaking of which, as we take a quick break there, Mike has written in, hi there. What are the best flowers to plant to attract pollinators? Someone told me milkweeds or daisies. Is that correct? And he's from New York City, NYC. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for telling us where you are. That's perfect.
Yes, we love to know where everybody is, Mike. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a wide range of different pollinators. Is there...
I mean, milkweed is definitely for the monarchs, right?
Yes, let's go to
that.
that.
One. Yeah, milkweed. Although bees and other things will visit the milkweed, but really milkweed, specifically the monarch butterfly. And there's other kinds of, like, there's butterfly weed. I know I have some swamp milkweed. There's a few other, varieties, not just that common milkweed that everybody thinks of.
That's right. Yeah. So there's all sorts of different things. There's actually a lot of studies, Mike, going on right now as to what all the pollen resources and all the nectar resources that all the different flowers have. So a lot of the herbs and the veggies and things that require cross pollinators tend to have a good amount of pollen in there. The other thing is looking at your native plant stories, because the insects of your native pollinators and the native insects around your area will instinctively recognize those as well. So that's another way to kind of maximize getting your pollinators into your area, is all the ones that have been introduced, but also the ones that are natively there that may not. And then the other thing is just having a good biodiversity in your perennial plantings as well. Not everybody likes the exact same thing. And the example was, just like you were saying, was for the Asclepias, your milkweed, right? We're going to draw more in your, like things like your aphids, but also to feed on the plants, you're going to get some bees, but you're also looking at your monarchs. So there's a fewer things. Everybody likes different things, right? I like pizza. Maybe Joanne prefers Thai food. Who knows?
Yeah,
right?
Thai food, chicken wings, much better than pizza.
See?
There you go.
So having a good biodiversity, and then there's a lot of research going into who has it better. Some of the smaller beneficial insects and pollinators who were saying they like things like from the carrot families or the buckwheats and asters. Those families are known for big floral displays, shallow umbel-like flowers, and they are high in pollen and nectar resources. So and then making sure that you have different plants blooming at different times, going back to the tips we've kind of discussed, because you're going to attract different insects in different stages of their life cycle. Everyone's not always there.
Some of those are things that, like, beekeepers will plant, like clover and buckwheat, you know, because they know that that's something that it will help them with their bees. It's a really good nectar source. So that's something too as well. And hence you get clover honey and
blueberry honey,
and lavender honey and things like that. So sometimes the answers to that question, Mike, are actually on the grocery shelf or at the farmer's market, right? So I think, do you think because I think some of those are very fragrant. Do you think fragrance plays a part?
I would believe so, for sure. I think that the plants have all evolved to kind of emit things, their pheromones, other scents. Some of them we can detect, some of them we definitely don't. But I think insects and other animals also have other things that they can detect that we don't. So I definitely believe that they can sense pheromones and other fragrances and concentrations of pollen in the air to get drawn in, whereas we can't.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, going back, I want to go back to the pheromone, like you said, the ladybug food and making a paste and putting it proactively in your plants. Do you think that's something that anybody with a vegetable garden should kind of do? Like, is there any downside to that?
You could. No, I mean, worst comes to worst, you spend $15-20 or whatever it is priced in your area. I think NIC has it for $9.99 or $14.99. So if, for example, if I put it out and nobody came and I had no insects, then no worries. I mean, someone might come in, they might eat the paste, and they might leave. They may find no one's there, but there's definitely, I don't think, any downside to it. It doesn't affect the plants. It won't hurt the crop that is growing. All you're going to do is put out a food source for someone to come by and investigate and move on. I think it's kind of like if you had spilt some bird seed or some, something that a bird might come down to your yard, or an animal like a seagull, right? They're going to come down, they eat some food, they find nothing else, they probably just move on. Yeah. But
okay, well, that's good.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that timing comes in. If you know you're about to have aphids all over your, your milkweeds, for example, Mike, you can put that out there. The ladybugs will come and they'll go after.
Mm-hmm. And there's no, I mean, we can talk about, we've got plenty of shows and plenty of information about nematodes and Japanese beetles and grubs. But once it's a Japanese beetle, there's no beneficial insect that eats it or attacks it as a insect.
Yeah, the only one that I could probably think of that might be big enough would be, like we were saying at the beginning, the praying mantis, because they will, if they kind of hunt a 10 square foot area, and anything that's smaller than it that they can get their hands on, they will eat.
Ooh.
So if I haven't seen or heard of anyone seeing praying mantis eating Japanese beetle, but if there were anybody out there, that's who I would think is probably going to go after it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So another listener question, Pedro has written in. Pedro says, "Hi, please explain. I'm very naive about pollinators. Why would we want those insects in our yards? What do they do exactly besides possibly stinging insects?" So possibly,
great
Pedro,
question, Pedro.
Yeah. The stinging part, you might have been thinking about the wasps. But why would you want pollinators in your yard? Basically, they're going to cross-pollinate everything. A lot of plants need a male and a female, or two, for example, your fruit trees. You need to have pollination between your different fruit flowers. Two different trees of different species or different cultivars may need to be cross-pollinated. So without these cross-pollinating and these insects coming in, your pollinators, you won't develop any fruit. So basically all the veggies, all your fruit trees, your berrying plants, they would have no cross-pollination. Not to say that there's not a few exceptions that self-pollinate, but a number of them require cross-pollination. So if we had no pollinators being drawn into our yard, we'd have no seeds, we'd have no fruit. So we'd lose that type of a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Other insects in our yards, like we were saying, Pedro, most insects eat other insects. So it's kind of that circle of life, and the that word just left that whole thing again. The food triangle, for example,
the food
right?
triangle, yeah.
Right. We want to make sure that stays stable. So if there are no insects, they're pollinators, they won't draw in the birds. And if the birds aren't there, they're not eating other insects that you're there. But there are bigger things that eat birds and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we want to keep that stable, balanced ecosystem. When we remove one brick, like Jenga, everything kind of starts to fall apart or become unbalanced, which can be detrimental to the plants that we have and just ourselves ultimately. And hence the threat of the bees and the monarchs and all that.
Yeah. And I think, Pedro, to think about that in I'm aging myself to say that I'm in my 50s. So I can remember as a kid driving around at night in my parents' car, and my dad having to use the windshield wipers all the time because we were constantly hitting bugs. And that's not the case anymore. Those bugs I don't know where they are. So the chemicals over the years that we've been spraying for our farmers, that type of thing. So I think that's also an issue that now the farmers are literally having to buy bees or bring in beneficial insects to their farms to help them, with their pollinate as well as support their, pest management systems. So I think that's why pollinators are very popular right now, is because we really have seen over the years a really big decline in them. And they used to naturally just be here, right? And yes, they're not all like pretty and as colorful and as fun as like monarch butterflies, but they were necessary. And the years and years of spraying different pesticides and herbicides has really brought them down. And so it's really become almost like a home gardener initiative to plant things that attract the more insects. And again, we certainly don't want the stinging ones either, and they tend to not necessarily be the beneficial ones, right? And I think a lot of people think of the honeybees, thinking of the honey and the decline of honeybees, but there are a lot of other, like our native bees, and a lot of bees that are more inconspicuous, right? That aren't as, cute, and bumblebees. I think those are also, everybody pays attention to those because they're so cute and visible. But there's a lot of other bees that are just as important, and they're certainly not stinging us,
Right.
right?
Right. And having a good balance of beneficial insects that are pollinating as well as predating other insects basically also reduces our maintenance in the garden as well. We've got that balance. Someone's eating the aphids that are eating your this. You don't have to spray all those chemicals.
Right.
You can reduce those damage and the work that you have to do to maintain those things.
Yeah, so I think that was a really good question.
Excellent question. Thank you,
I think
Pedro.
that was really good, and I hope that answer helped you understand why we want to, why there's initiative to really have homeowners and communities. A lot of community gardens have got definitely planting things, with pollinators in mind.
That's right. That's right. Everyone, you always get those questions in the garden. I want nothing that'll hold no insects, attract no insects, and
yeah, I get that too. Designs, they don't want bees.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's kind of like, well, if you have a flower, like the bee may show up. Like there's no way to say no. The bee can't stay.
That's it. No insects is a dead garden, and a dead garden is a dead earth.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I get that a lot with roses. I have someone who's, she really wanted red flowers in her garden, which, as with perennials, that's really hard. And I bought her a couple, for her to choose from. And one of them I brought, a small rose bush, and it was, and she said, no, roses mean that there'll be lots of bees and wasps. And I was like, okay, I give up. So I have the rose bush on my driveway that I need to plant now. But yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it, especially if people are allergic and they're afraid.
Yes.
But really, they don't want to sting us. They've got a job to do, and that's their focus.
That's it. They don't notice us. We are something that's in their way. They're flying by, and again, unless you have sugars or you're emitting something that says food to them, they might come and investigate you. But the wasps, they're not after you. Just there's a human, let's get it. No, yeah. They're busy doing other things, right? So yeah.
So what other types of things, you mentioned natives and biodiversity. What other things can we do to help support beneficial insects in our yard?
Yeah. So I think we touched on one already, is just the use of pesticides, right? Always use the least toxic method possible. And that might be beneficial insects. Again, if your garden's drawing these in, that's just going to do your own thing. So you don't only use pesticides where you absolutely need to use pesticides, because there are a lot of pesticides, most pesticides, when they come into contact with others, or in the States to the south, we don't have very many left here in Canada, but a lot of the old pesticides also have residuals or residues that are left behind that will kill other insects when they bite into things, things like that. And they don't know a good guy from a bad guy often. So use as few pesticides as possible.
Personally, we have a constant issue with ants. And so we do spray. I kind of spray the perimeter of the house. We did get none in the house this year. But I've got, brand new patio in the backyard. And so it's certainly not coming up through my, my interlocking. But there's little ants and different size ants like everywhere. So is that like when I'm spraying for the ants, could I be endangering other things?
If you're because the ant ones tend to be a little bit more intense because they have such a hard exoskeletal shell. So it's not something like an insecticidal soap type thing will just wipe them out. So that can be a little bit intense. But if you're targeting one space, you're usually all right. Usually the ants are dominant. A tip for your ants though, and I've learned this actually again from John at NIC, nematodes. Apply nematodes to where your ants are. They'll go in, and a number of the nematodes, they'll go after the soft-bodied white larva or the eggs. So when the ant colony, if there's a concentration enough, and John tells me that golf courses will use this trick on the greens when they don't want anthills on the putting greens, right? They soak into the area where the ants are, and they realize that there are nematodes there that are going to go after their larvae or their eggs, and they'll evacuate the putting green, those areas, because the nematodes will attack them and threaten the colony. So they can actually lift the colony, sound the retreat signal, and they'll move, they'll shift out of that space. So you're not using any chemicals. You're going to use a biological insect that's going to hunt for food, and if none, die away to a point. And the ants will move unharmed pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, you won't be able to kill
but
them.
on interlock, like that's fine on the grasses and stuff.
Yeah, in interlock, that's
yeah.
a little bit more intense. Yeah, you are. That's where again, and there's going to be minimal insects on the interlock because there's minimal pollinators or food or things like that.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Um,
you mentioned water source.
Yes, I was just going to say.
Yes.
Water source. Insects like us, they need to drink, right? They need water as well. So adding a water source, whether it's if you have a bird bath, it might be as simple as just adding some stones to your bird bath so that you have an edge or more surfaces where it reaches the edge of the skin of the water that bugs can and birds and beetles and bees can land on the edge, walk to the edge and take a little sip. So adding a water source. And of course, watch for mosquitoes. You want to change the water as frequently as you can. Yeah. People will also say that they overhead water their plants as well, so that certain leaves in certain areas will hold water, so that as they're foraging during the day, there's some small puddles tucked in there, in and around their plants, and they'll drink up water as well.
Okay.
Going to the bees, for example, plant in groupings, so larger floral displays. A lot of people will plant one of something.
Right.
And if you look at the bees, the way the bees will do, they tend to move far away from their nests, especially like honeybees can travel 5 to 12 kilometers to go and find the pollen sources. But where there's one or two little things for them, they tend to forage it, but it's a last kind of option, or it's one of their least favorites to do. So planting and grouping. So do larger floral displays. So do like a 4 by 4 foot area or more where you have a number of good pollinators and a good nectar source for them to come in. It's easier for them to scout and see, and they tend to visit those bigger areas because they know that there's large deposits of floral and pollen nectar there. So they'll travel to a field of lavender or
right. And often like it should be almost the same plant, like planted. I mean, even aesthetically, I happen to have catmint, so I have 4 or 5 areas in my garden with catmint, nepeta, and that is by far my top pollinator in my garden.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, so I find that it blooms a long time, but the fact that there's so much of it in a reasonable area. Same with purple coneflower. Like having one purple coneflower plant is not necessarily enough, but if you've got 3, I mean, one aesthetically and design wise, it makes much bigger impact if you're planting in 3s and 5s, that type of thing. And I know sometimes when people have small yards, they want, one of everything. And, and I understand that. And I'll design that for them if that's what they want. But sometimes it's better to have, 3 different plants, but just more of those same 3 plants.
Right.
And that has a bigger impact on the pollinators, because I've read too that the pollinators will come back to that same plant like day after day. Like you said, they travel very far, but if they've got an area that's we can never tell that that's the same bee, but research has been done that they will return and that they've memorized, where the pollen is.
Exactly. That 1 or 2, not so much, but that nice stand through a nice, beautifully designed landscape where you've got little clusters of echinaceas or a few pockets of, 5, 7, 9 nepetas somewhere.
Yeah,
they are going to lock into that. That's gold to them for sure.
Okay. So just wondering, as far as the garden center, just to jump to that, you mentioned the ladybug lure, so that will lure beneficial insects. Is that something that's in stock at the garden centers now?
It should be, yeah. Most the garden centers that'll sell beneficials, they'll usually have that almost at all times of the year because it does do your ladybugs, your ladybird beetles, but it'll also do like your lacewings and some of the others
Okay.
beneficial insects and flies
Okay.
that'll come to your garden too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And nematodes, but now is not the time for nematodes, right?
we're past. We're all
Okay.
past the time of nematodes. They're changing their forms into their adult beetles, and they've hardened off from the white grub into their little chrysalis pupation thing. Where the nematodes are very hard pressed to penetrate that
Right.
chitin shell. So
Okay.
yeah.
And as far as the most garden centers, I think they've been out of stock in a few places. I've seen some forums online, getting the ladybugs and the
Yes.
praying
Yeah.
mantis.
So
That those that some buying the actual beneficial insect is something you can do.
right.
So you can search online or your online resources for our listeners or your local resources. I've heard in our area, and I see, for example, is out of stock on ladybugs. But that is something that you now is a good time if you wanting to bring some, do it the I guess the easier method or the.
Yeah, and like you said too, there's also just like we were saying, what the timing of the flowers and what insects are where. Same thing with buying your beneficials too. Your praying mantises, they the female will lay the egg case on taller kind of like weedy grasses or like waist high perennials and other things we consider weeds in meadow spaces, and they're out and above the ground all year long. So they will take the winter freeze. So you can usually find a good praying mantis case as early as like the beginning of March and almost all the way through. And then you get to a point where they should have already been hatched and they need to be out and growing and feeding. So
Okay.
eventually they become gone. But the ladybugs as well, they tend to be being bred earlier in the spring. So March, April, May, usually you can't find too many of them or many suppliers because they're actually going through their breeding cycle. So you want to see them lay eggs and the teens grow up and pupate into adults and then harvested and then they're sent out. So they tend to be more available in about the June period, depending on where you are, because that second brood is ready, that generation is
Oh,
ready
okay.
to go out and mate and do their things.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
A couple as we reach the last 10 minutes, and June comes to a warm
And
close and
yes.
an end here on down the garden path. Ron has written in. Hello, everyone. Love the show. Oh, Matt, you sound like a PhD on insects. Excellent. Such knowledge. Any veggie plants left at stores or too late? Take a look around. Like you were saying, John's in our area in the
In
GTA here,
Uxbridge,
Ron.
yeah,
Uh,
north of us in Uxbridge.
right. They've got a good selection of some smaller and maybe some medium size. I forget if the pictures I remember you posting of some different veggies. So definitely take a look around. Watch, tomatoes and some peppers. Some of the things that take many more days, Ron, to get to that maturity. You may not have that much time left. You might be harvesting in the end of October or November, but there are still lots of different lettuces and things that you can be shorter growing period things that you could be. So take a look around. A number of them places will be out, but you might find the odd gem like John's up in Uxbridge that has lots to go still. So yeah, definitely take a look around. Totally depends on where you are and what your veggie seasons are like.
For sure, for sure. And there
Yeah.
are many veggies that you can. It's not too late. You can still start some from seeds. You're like
Right.
lettuces, radishes,
Yep.
carrots. Some of those quick ones.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure,
and
day ones.
yeah, and I think there's even some groups like some Facebook groups of some gardeners that there might be people who have extra plants. I had some extra basil that I just didn't get around to planting, and I finally, just stuck them in a pot. But I could have. So I think there was some. I wonder if there's can be some inspiration of some plant swaps, right? Of people that
For
have too
sure.
much. Oh, I did give some of the onions. Remember, I was growing onions by seed.
Yep.
So I did fill my back garden. I filled my flower garden with some onions. But then I did have extra, so I did give them to my neighbor across the street. Has some little girl, couple of little girls, and they were doing some gardening. And I said, why don't you try it with the onions? So yeah, so there's a few other options there for you for vegetables.
For sure. Yeah. I can think of 4 people I know who had like extras growing plants of everything. Yeah. So definitely take a look around. Ron, that's awesome. One more question too, as well as we go. We have, Wallace has written in. Hi, I'm an amateur photographer and I wanted to know what would be the best plants to attract butterflies. Thank you, Wallace. I mean, right off the top of my head, butterfly bush and any of the Asclepias jump to mind. But, coneflowers, coreopsis, lavenders, penstemons, salvias, bee balms, scabiosas, yarrows, asters. There's
Yeah,
quite a number.
don't forget my cat mint as
Your
well.
catmint, most certainly. So,
Roseanne geranium. I've
yep.
seen, Roseanne geranium. And just a shrub wise, Seven Suns. Se-
Mm, a great fall, late
yeah.
summer bloomer that attracts.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that is a really cool tree. I was in a client's house today, and she had one. I had never seen one in the garden, and I asked her, and I said, "Is it true?" And she said, "Butterflies, hummingbirds in the fall because it's a rare fall flowering tree."
Yes.
That I've seen videos online. If you Google and search online, you'll see it, and it's just an absolute monarch butterfly magnet.
And one to take a look out for, I believe it's by Proven Winners. It's a great one. Again, a Seven Suns tree, like we were saying. What was it? Oh, Temple of Bloom. So if you're an
Oh,
Indiana Jones fan,
yeah.
Temple of Bloom. So it comes out with that white, but then as the flowers fade after and fall away after a couple of weeks, the bracts are left behind. So much like the poinsettias, where the flowers then become bright red clusters of the spent bracts.
Oh.
Bracts, I believe, if I'm saying it right. Bracts, which is so it gives you like an even extended flowering season, which kind of so it's really cool. So check out Temple of Bloom,
Temple of Bloom.
which is
Okay.
just
I definitely
a
have to
great
look for
name
that.
too.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so 7:55. Can you believe it?
I know, I know. So we covered a lot. I mean, we did mention, a lot of the flowering perennials. I think the key is to go for long, as far as which plants to plant, the long bloomers. So things that bloom a long time, daylilies that are one and done, some things that are shorter, that need a lot of deadheading. Even daisies, I find a little short. I think it's better to go for things that are longer blooming, and when you read the tags, if they're blooming May to September or May to August or
Mm-hmm.
June to September, that's really going for something like that, because there's always going to be fluctuation because of weather. So
That's right.
yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can plant, and a lot
And
of reasons to have beneficial insects in your garden.
that's
So
right.
I'm glad we covered. It's amazing, time just flies,
Oh,
doesn't it?
it does.
It
It really
does.
does.
And I hope everybody enjoyed this episode, like this series, right? We covered a lot about perennials and 5 weeks, and we're excited to talk about shrubs next month, aren't we?
We are. We are talking everything to do with deciduous and evergreen shrubs coming up this next July. There's only 4 days in July, so there's lots of information we're going to pack into those 4 Monday nights. But yeah, I believe next week we're going to kick off our July month-long talk about shrubs with some native shrubs.
Excellent, excellent. And often many of those will be pollinators as well, so it'll probably be a
Yeah,
little bit of a carryover.
I should say very much a carryover from tonight to
Yeah,
tomorrow
yeah.
or next week.
So,
Yeah,
and we'd love to thank you for listening, and remember that you can find us on. I've had some emails lately. We've had some Facebook posts, so definitely you can find me at down2earth.ca is my website, and all my social media links are there, as well as links to the podcast, past episodes, and on Facebook you can find Down the Garden Path podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And Matt, where can everybody find you?
yeah, you can find me at naturalaffinitydesigns.ca. And again, all my links to my social media, etc., are there. And definitely check out at Down the Garden Path podcast on your Facebook and your Instagram feeds and continue the conversation with us afterwards, after the
That's
show.
right. That's right. And I do want to give a shout out to our past couple of years. We've done that month in the garden, like July in the garden. So
Yeah.
this would be a typical situation where we would have done a July in the garden, right? The last Monday in June, we would have talked about July in the garden. So we've got 2 years of those episodes that are on our podcast archives, and lots of great information there about bloomers, what to plant, what to do in your garden in July. I'll repost a link to some of those in our Facebook group, but just want to give a shout out for our listeners, especially if you're new. We've got a lot of great content in the past, and it's very seasonal. So what happened last July, aside from the pandemic, in the garden is the same, and same with the July of in 2000 or 2018, right? So definitely check out those episodes because we put a lot. Matt especially put a ton of work into those, and they're really good shows. So yeah, so thank you
That's right.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Larry, Mike, Pedro, Ron, and Wallace. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to everybody who didn't have questions as well for tuning in and joining us here this Monday evening. We love that you spend your evenings with us. And thanks again, Gary, as well, for helping us produce this wonderful show. And that's it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Down the Garden Path here on Reality Radio 101.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your hosts, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.